There are moments when truth hums quietly beneath the noise of life, waiting for a brave listener. Remember standing in that yard, still, while everything inside me whispered that something was wrong. No one had told me a word, yet my spirit felt the disturbance like a tremor beneath calm soil. I could sense laughter that wasn't honest, silence that wasn't peace, and faces hiding behind half-truths. It wasn't sight that told me, it was a pull from somewhere both within and beyond me. The air carried a weight I couldn't explain, and even the wind felt aware of deception. I knew without proof that something sacred in our circle was being played with behind my back. There was no anger yet, only that strange knowing that comes before the storm fully announces itself. People say discernment is coincidence. I say it's God's quiet way of preparing you before the fall. I opened my mouth without planning to, speaking words I didn't rehearse, but they landed with divine accuracy. Whoever knows what's hidden, speak now, I said, not to accuse but to call light into darkness. Those words felt like they didn't belong to me. They carried the gravity of something higher. The wind shifted, and I saw guilt ripple through faces like ripples on disturbed water. No one confessed then, but truth already began trembling under the weight of being known before spoken. I felt peace and tension meet in my chest, a strange mix that only truth-seekers ever understand. Later that evening I entered the room, and silence folded itself around me like a cloak. Laughter had died, and conversations scattered like startled birds trying to escape what couldn't be escaped. They didn't know I had already seen with the spirit what their eyes still tried to hide. The knowing doesn't always come with words. Sometimes it's just presence, heavy, certain, undeniable. The one who stayed behind couldn't hold the weight of what truth was demanding that night. They spoke in fragments, but each word confirmed what I had already sensed in the unseen. It wasn't the betrayal that broke me. It was how easily people play with holy trust. Discernment is a strange gift. It comforts and wounds at the same time, sharpening faith through fire. Every truth revealed feels like a cross to carry, yet grace always walks beside it quietly. I realize that knowing ahead of time isn't power. It's responsibility to handle revelation with mercy. The spirit that sees is not called to punish, but to restore what deception has fractured. Still, the yard felt colder that night, filled with echoes of laughter that once meant safety. I walked out with heavy steps, knowing that every gift comes with the burden of restraint. It's easy to see, but harder to stay kind when the light exposes betrayal too clearly. Discernment without grace becomes pride. But grace without discernment becomes blindness wearing a halo of denial. As I learned to walk with that gift, I met another kind, the one who bends shadows. They don't see truth. They twist energy, using pain as their thread to control unseen forces. We call them many names, witch, sorcerer, manipulator, but they are all mirrors of misuse. Where the seer restores, the Molloy interferes, shaping energy to harm instead of heal. One day, a woman came to me holding gloves that belonged to someone who had wronged her. She wanted me to agree to a prayer that would return the pain to its source. But vengeance wrapped in prayer is still vengeance, and I told her gently that power without purity destroys. Fingerprints of the heart that owned it before. Objects remember energy. Every belonging carries fingerprints of the heart that owned it before. She didn't understand. She thought justice and control were the same, but they never have been. The true seer doesn't bind others through objects. They free hearts by revealing what binds them within. The Molloy whispers, you can fix this by force, but grace says, you can heal this by faith. I watched her choose silence, unsure which voice to trust, her pain or her peace. That night I learned again that gifts without guidance become traps disguised as miracles. Light, when wielded without humility, becomes another form of darkness, subtler but just as dangerous. So I began praying not to know more, but to know only what love could handle. People think revelation feels glamorous, like prophecy wrapped in fire, but it often feels like heartbreak. Knowing before knowing strips you of illusion, forcing you to see people as fragile and complicated. Every gift has its cost, and mine was innocence, the luxury of not knowing what lurks beneath smiles. Still, I would never trade it, because discernment became the compass that led me closer to God. He showed me that truth is Not for exposure, but for transformation, and transformation begins in love. Once I saw a man who smiled with sincerity, but his words dripped quiet manipulation. I felt it immediately, the pull, the falseness, and my spirit whispered, "Don't entertain that charm." Discernment saves more hearts than confrontation ever will, because silence often guards what wisdom already knows. To see is one thing, but to respond with peace is the higher miracle of restraint. That night I prayed, "Lord, teach me not to reveal every truth I see, only what heals." He answered, not in words but in timing, showing me that divine revelation always arrives with purpose. Some truths are meant to be seen but not spoken, held until grace says now. I learned that discernment without compassion is judgment dressed in religious language pretending to be holiness. True sight is never about proving you were right. It's about helping others find their own repentance, and sometimes silence is the loudest sermon truth can preach without breaking a single soul. There came a time when the gift felt heavier than a blessing and quieter than a curse. It's one thing to sense storms before they come, another to bear the silence of their waiting. People think knowing brings peace, but foresight often leaves you wrestling between revelation and responsibility. Every glimpse of what's coming tests whether your heart loves truth more than comfort or applause. I learned that revelation without humility becomes arrogance, and arrogance blinds faster than ignorance ever could. The yard of my heart became a battlefield between wanting to warn and wanting to rest. Sometimes I'd see shadows around people, not evil exactly, but the residue of their unspoken wounds. God would whisper, "Don't expose them, just stand near until they remember light." That command was harder than any prophecy, because waiting without judgment feels like crucifixion in slow motion. Discernment without compassion is like lightning without rain, impressive, but leaves the ground dry and cracked. So I prayed for softer eyes, ones that could see without cutting, discern without humiliating. And slowly I realized seeing the future isn't about predicting events but perceiving hearts before they harden. The Spirit doesn't reveal to entertain curiosity. He reveals to reroute destruction into mercy's arms. Est prophecy is a life lived with grace. Each vision taught me that love must precede revelation, or revelation becomes weapon instead of wisdom. And so I carried the weight quietly, knowing that the loudest prophecy is a life lived with grace. One night I dreamt of the yard. Again, only this time it was divided in two. On one side grew thorns, thick and deliberate, the kind that whisper promises of protection but bring bleeding. On the other side were lilies, stubborn in their softness, growing through stones as though pain were soil. The Spirit said, "These are the two kinds of knowing, one rooted in fear, one in faith." I woke up, I knew He was showing me how easily gifts can tilt toward pride when not anchored in grace. I woke up sweating, the dream still clinging like incense, both fragrant and suffocating at once. The thorned side represented control, the Molloy way, where revelation becomes manipulation dressed as wisdom. The lilies were surrender, faith that trusts timing over power, purity over performance, truth over spectacle. I wrote the dream down, praying I'd always choose the lilies even when thorns felt safer to hold. But thorns are addictive. They make you feel invincible until you realize you're bleeding and calling it glory. The lilies ask for patience, and patience is expensive when the world rewards those who shout, "I knew first." The revelation aligns with redemption, not revenge. Still, every true seer must choose silence until the revelation aligns with redemption, not revenge. I've learned that God hides timing inside obedience, and only trust can unlock what force will never open. So I began tending the lilies in my life, watering them with prayer and restraining my desire to be right. And every time I chose gentleness over power, the yard grew brighter even while storms gathered beyond the gate. There was a boy once who came to me trembling, saying he saw things in his dreams. He feared he was cursed because the things he dreamt always unfolded exactly as he described them later. I told him curses mimic gifts. The difference is who gets glorified when the vision comes true. He asked, "How do I know if I'm being used by light or darkness when I see?" And I said, ask yourself whether your sight brings peace or pride, healing or control, because the enemy counterfeits purpose by giving power divorced from compassion and calling it destiny fulfilled. The boy wept, and I saw myself in him, young, unsure, more fascinated by vision than virtue. We prayed together, and I asked God to redirect his seeing toward service, not spectacle. From that day he no longer feared his dreams. He learned to steward them with humility instead. That's when I understood that discernment multiplies when shared in truth. It decays when guarded out of ego. The yard isn't just for one seer. It's a classroom for every heart that listens honestly. Mind them who saw further. Each revelation we share should lift someone higher, not remind them who saw further. So I taught him the law of grace. The more light you share, the less darkness survives. He smiled through tears and said, then the gift isn't to be special, it's to make others whole. And in that moment the lilies on my side of the yard bloomed brighter than ever before. Still, not everyone who saw the light celebrated it. Some feared what exposure might cost their comfort. The Moloi thrive on secrecy. They despise open air because light ruins the taste of deception. One came to me wrapped in politeness, but her words carried the smell of hidden malice behind smiles. She said, you shouldn't see so much. It makes people uncomfortable when you know without asking. I smiled softly and said, maybe truth doesn't come to comfort, but to cleanse what's been ignored. Her eyes hardened fear pretending to be anger, and I realized discernment can provoke what it reveals. She left with a threat wrapped in laughter, the kind that makes the air colder after it fades. Days later, the glove's story returned. Someone tried to twist pain into proof of power again. But this time I didn't confront. I prayed, and the energy of it reversed quietly like morning frost melting. The one who cursed me began to confess without knowing why. Truth pulled confession out of hiding gently. I learned then that grace doesn't fight magic with magic, it simply starves darkness by refusing to feed it. When people operate in shadows, they need resistance to survive. Silence and peace suffocate them faster than anger, so I stopped explaining myself, stopped proving my purity to those allergic to sincerity. The seer wins not by combat but by presence, by standing so still that lies echo back on themselves. In that stillness I saw the Moloi fade, not destroyed, just irrelevant where light refused to wrestle. Years later I realized the gift wasn't just about others. It was a mirror for my own healing. God had trusted me with sight, so I'd stop hiding from my own shadows dressed as virtue. Every revelation about others was also a whisper about something in me needing surrender or softness. The yard became internal. Every betrayal mirrored my pride. Every confession mirrored my need for mercy. Discernment had begun as protection but evolved into intimacy. Seeing became prayer instead of prediction. When I sensed deceit, I asked, Lord, where do I deceive myself into thinking I'm beyond this pain? The answer was always humbling. Light shines both ways, exposing the seer as much as the seen. Why, there's no true prophetic sight without repentance, no divine foresight without reflection, no victory without humility. The more I allowed grace to interpret what I saw, the softer my sight became toward others. I stopped labeling people as wicked and started seeing them as weary souls who lost their way. Yard became a sanctuary again, not a courtroom, and my words turned from verdicts to invitations. To see truly is to love deeply, because only love can look directly at darkness and not blink. I learned that every Malloy still carries a broken child somewhere, trying to remember light's original warmth. I learned that, and so I began to pray for them, not to win, but to remind them of who they are. Victory wasn't in being right. It was in staying kind when rightness would have been easier.